talking about journeys, destinations, culture, adventure, gear, conservation, and all the things we haven't yet thought of. This episode is brought to you by Sunwear Solar Technology, a premium manufacturer of fixed and portable solar panels for overlanding vehicles and marine applications. Designed and manufactured in Germany, Sunwear panels are tested under the harshest environmental conditions to ensure rugged reliability for years to come. Trust Sunwear for your solar energy needs, no matter where your adventures take you. Check out their website at sunwear.solar. You'll find the link in the description below. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Today, my guest is Reece Rheinbach. Better known to many as Travel Beast on Instagram, he stems from Carlisle in the UK and is an enthusiastic overlander who drives his self-built Toyota Land Cruiser. Some of his expedition highlights include the Panamericana and a 1,500 kilometre north to south off-pavement journey through the backlands of Portugal. This episode is about his most recent solo adventure, 1,000 miles off-road in Wales. We'll also be touching on topics such as his car and some of the trials and tribulations of what turned out to be a surprisingly challenging journey. So, with the brief intro out the way, welcome Reece.
Thank you, Mike. It's good to be here.
Yes, we haven't spoken for quite some time. So I think we're going to have, let's say, an interesting conversation about Wales today.
I think so. A lot to talk about.
Let me just kick off the topic by saying Wales, for such a long journey, I mean, you're talking here 1,000 miles off-road, might not be many people's first contemplation of a destination. Isn't it difficult in the UK to find that much off-road track?
It is. It's very, very difficult. Yeah. The planning of the trip took a lot of effort and time to, compile GPX tracks and maps and map out a continuous trail that would take me for the whole 1,000 miles, and it did connect with some tarmac sections as well. I think there was some people like a misconception that it was all off-road, and in total the mile count I think was 1,200 miles, so 200 miles was on road and 1,000 miles of it was off. So yeah, it is a difficult thing to do, but it is possible,
as we've seen. Excuse me. You published on Instagram, was it just over 100 reels of your journey? That's a hell of a lot of work, I know, putting that together on its own. So where did you actually kick off? Where did you drive off pavement and onto the first track?
Yeah, so I first left the paved road down in south of Wales. So I I'm from Carlisle in Cumbria, and so I took the M6 down country, peeled off into the south of Wales, and I think it was just north of Caerphilly. I think that's how you pronounce it. I'm terrible with Welsh pronunciation, so any Welsh speakers that are listening are probably
that area is famous for cheese, I believe, as well.
That's apparently so. Yeah. Yeah, but it was South Wales that I peeled off and started the off-road journey from there.
I suppose we should also point out this is the second big journey you've done in your Toyota Land Cruiser since the complete rebuild. So even though you did a lot of testing in, Portugal some time ago, this was like also a major test of your equipment and how you built the vehicle in preparation for a much longer trip, much later, let's say this year or next year.
Yes, very much so. It was, in addition to being something that I wanted to do and an adventure that I wanted to take, it was like a dry run for sure, to see how the build performed in very different terrain, As you touched on, I did Portugal and through Europe, not off-road as well, but Portugal was the largest like off-road expedition that I did previously to this, and that was 1,500 kilometers. But the difference in terrain was startling, honestly, and it's something that took me by surprise in many ways. And it might sound kind of obvious, but I'd kind of packed and dressed for Portugal. I had this idea in my mind. I was like, oh, well, I'm just going to go and do the same thing. And it was a very, very different experience in terms of terrain and weather, most importantly. Portugal's very dry and sunny and beautiful, and Wales is anything but,
All right. So,
as you know,
so
so.
you had a lot of rain then, I'm gathering.
Oh, very much so, very much so. Yeah, I picked the window that I think it was some of the most torrential rain that I've ever seen in my life, if not the most torrential rain, for such an extended period as well. As soon as I peeled off the paved road, it started to tip it down, and it basically didn't stop for about 5 days.
Oh, God.
Uh, yeah, so that in of itself was just so it added such a different dynamic to the trip. And it's funny when you're in when you're up against weather like that, it doesn't only change the nature of the trails, it makes them more challenging. And it involves a lot of mud, of course. So you're fighting against mud and poor visibility and all that kind of thing, but it also has like a psychological effect on the whole expedition. You feel like you're up against it, you're constantly drenched, like there's no way of, because you're in and out of the car, for various different reasons, 150 times a day. Gates, breakdowns, getting stuck a million times, and so you can't not do it saturated. And so you feel up against it the whole time.
That's actually, you just brought up a point there of sort of getting stuck and the changing trails, etc. Because you did this completely on your own as well, didn't you?
I did, yeah, yes. It was all solo, and Portugal had been also alone, uh, but the nature of the off road side of things was extremely different. Whilst Portugal had some challenging sections, it was mainly rocky technical sections of four-wheel drive where you could plot what you're going to do and all that kind of thing, and then execute it. And so it was all right. I didn't use my recovery boards once in Portugal, whereas in Wales, right off the bat, it was thick mud, massive washouts on the tracks. I put the cruiser on its side like 3 times within the first 20 miles of the trail, um, and had to recover myself 3 times with the recovery board. So like after that first 20 miles, I was like, Jesus, this is going to be impossible. I can't do this.
Because you don't have a winch or anything on board, do you?
I don't know. I don't have a winch. I used to have a winch a long time ago, and I blew it up. It's part of a very different story, but I blew it up trying to pull my cousin Ross, his troopy, out of a geothermal mud pit in Baja, California, years ago. And I hadn't used one or felt the need to use one since. And I thought, oh, I'll just travel light. And Wales proved to me that actually a winch is pretty necessary, or at least very, very nice to have.
When you've been doing your off-road sections, did you run into
Mm.
other people on the way as well?
Yes, I would occasionally come upon other people, but more rarely than I would have anticipated. Honestly, part of the part of this trip really was a strange feeling of the juxtaposition between knowing that you're in Wales, which is geographically very small. I think it's not more than 200 miles north to south, and knowing that there are a ton of people around, and yet not coming upon them very often. And so it's a very strange feeling. That you're very close to civilization geographically, and yet you're so far away from it at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
because obviously I'm deliberately putting myself in remote tracks and locations. And so it's just a strange feeling. You go for kind of days and days at a time without really seeing any signs of civilization. It's all off piste, it's all 4x4 tracks. Maybe you'll see the odd farmer, And yet, probably there's a bloody Tesco supermarket 3 miles away. Such a strange feeling. And that's something a lot of people in the comments on the series would point out, like, oh, you're being a drama queen here. There's a Tesco just down the road, or one of people's favorite things to say, oh yeah, there's a Chinese takeaway just around the around the corner there. Maybe, mate, but I'm still stuck in a ditch.
So when you did actually meet people, how was their reception of your, let's say, ploughing through the countryside?
Uh, well, actually, yeah. I was expecting probably more friction than I received. I've done a lot of off-roading in the Lake Districts, and quite often you get people, will stop you and say you're not to be here, and you kind of politely explain, well, it is actually legal for me to be coming through here, so yeah, I'm gonna go. So and that's usually fine. But yeah, in Wales there was nothing like that. Occasionally a farmer would kind of flag you down and kind of say positive things, like, oh, what you doing, cool car, a little bit of trail patter, and then you go on your
Mm-hmm.
way. But yeah, those interactions were few and far between. I spoke to very few people really on the trail in Wales.
I suppose on the other or the upside of that is that yes, you were travelling alone, but you are, let's say, a good walking distance away from assistance if you really, really did need it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that was something that whilst I was doing it alone, and I knew that in some sections it would be quite a hike to get out. I did know that it was going to be at least possible, and 4G signal is reasonable throughout a lot of Wales, at least. So I kind of think, well, if it the worst comes to the worst, I can leave the car, hike out, get some signal, call I don't know who, but somebody, and you know, deal with whatever situation I'm in. So that was at least a comfort.
All right. So tell us a little bit about, other than the dirt and the mud and some of the sticky bits you got into, some of the other challenges which you had to face, the sort of, I don't know, even let's say mechanical issues, because judging by the reels you posted, they were not few and far between. You had your fair share there.
I did indeed. Yeah, yeah. It's yeah, I had a fair few issues. That probably the thing that plagued the expedition the most was tire and wheel related problems within, again, the first, I think, 20 miles. I had ripped the sidewall out of one tire, I had a puncture in the other, and I was like, oh man, like I remember thinking prior to this trip, seeing overlanders with two spare wheels and tires, I'm thinking, God, that's excessive. I can't see an instance where you would need two, and then having taken out two tires essentially within the first 20 miles of the trail, I was like, God Almighty, I wish I had two spares. um, and so that in of itself, these tires are quite difficult to find, and having ripped out a sidewall out of a tire, it's done, basically. There are things you can do, which I then went on to do, and those things are dodgy sidewall repairs, basically,
Mm-hmm.
with putting like plugs in the sidewall until it seals it up, and you can't drive on road for any length of time with something like that. But the idea is that it would at least get you out of a pinch, if you absolutely have to. So right off the bat, I had ripped the sidewall out of this tire, and I was immediately traveling without a spare. I was like, oh my God, like if I get one more thing happen here, you know, I'm gonna be in trouble. Um, and then from there, basically, I was just plagued with various different things. I bent two wheels on two different occasions. One was on the Strata, Florida, which is the the most, I would say, famous track in the
Mm-hmm.
UK. It's a section of, I think, 12 or 15 miles of just total, off road and pretty intense off road terrain. And I took my first river crossing a little fast, actually, in retrospect. And see, this is the other thing, interestingly, about the psychology of traveling alone. I think you're forced into gung ho driving a little bit more than you otherwise would be. If you've got a convoy of people, you can afford to make a few mistakes where you might get stuck. If you end up in a river and you get stuck in some mud, okay, there's someone there to pull you out.
Hmm.
Without that, you kind of I tend to find myself anyway with a heavier right foot, because you kind of think, okay, well, I need to get through this because there's no one here to bloody pull me out of a river. And in so doing, you put yourself in these situations where you bend wheels and then have to spend the next couple of hours in a rainstorm trying to put it right.
So you're also saying there that you had the steel wheels which you're running?
Yes, correct. Yeah, so I have steel wheels, and yeah, I bent the one on the Strata Florida, which was quite a serious bend on a rock, I presume,
Mhm.
in the river. And I got to the other side of the river with the tire flapping off, and there's always steam billowing off the exhaust system. And you can hear that flapping of the stricken tire. Like, Christ, I know what's happened there. And then I looked at that and I thought, there's no way I'm going to be able to bend this back with any to any trueness
Mhm.
myself here. And at that point, bearing in mind that I only had the as a spare the tire that I'd ripped the sidewall out of and done a dodgy sidewall repair with a million worms, they call them, like tire
Yeah.
plugs, all sticking out the side like a weird scarecrow looking thing. Like, Jesus. So I'm going to have to do the rest of the Strata Florida, one of the most intense four-wheel drive tracks in the UK, on this spare, which I'd already ripped the tire sidewall out. I was like, oh my God, this is all going a bit, Pete Tong. So, yeah, it's an interesting experience for sure.
Definitely. But then I say you're sort of a slight glutton for punishment anyway, aren't you?
I definitely do seek out the self-flagellation, to put it mildly, yeah.
So, what are some of the things which, I mean, traveling through Wales, it's got bags of history. I know you were away from the
Mm.
towns and the villages, but were there sort of historical sites which you managed to cross through as well?
There were. So actually, part of the trail that I followed the Roman road of San Helen. So this is an ancient road that was built by the Romans in the conquest of the British Isles,
Hmm.
in the first century AD, I think. And so that alone, traveling along this 2,000-year-old route, was an incredible feeling. Like, talk about going, where people have been before you and all that, your ancestors and all that kind of thing. It's an incredibly, um, what's the word? It's just a really interesting experience. You really feel like a connection to the history of the area. And so in doing that, there are sites along St. Helen and elsewhere that you naturally come across. There was a Roman fort called Torley Muir, I think it's
Hmm.
called. Um, and these were sites that I kind of knew existed, but I didn't really go out my way to find them. And so to be confronted with them along the trail, when you're plotting a map of, sorry, when you're plotting a trail of this length into your maps, you don't often know exactly where you are, because your singular focus is following this trail. And so often I would come across these sites by accident, or I'd be like, okay, I programmed this in months ago. Oh, Christ, okay, so it's here that I am. And so there's often an element of surprise for me as well, which was really, really cool. And so Tormeni Muir, I can never remember how you say that, was one of those instances. I kind of saw my, okay, this is a Roman fort, and you go there. And one of the most remarkable things about historical sites in Wales, I think, is that they're kind of just there, and there's not all of them, obviously, but a lot of them, because of the remoteness of them, and the fact that they're in the middle of nowhere. There's no visitor center or anything like that. You're just there, and here's this 2,000-year-old ruin, and it's just you and it, and so you can explore it at will. And so that was really cool. It turns out that this thing was built during the conquest of the British Isles by the Romans against kind of the indigenous
Mm.
tribes as were there, and they built this thing to reinforce Roman power in the region, because there'd been like a guerrilla war for 20 years of resistance of these
Hmm.
tribes trying to kick the Romans out of their ancestral lands. And so they built this thing to hold 2,000 Roman legionnaires to control the area, you know.
Wow.
And so it's quite an extensive site.
Let me just ask a question. I mean, we've both been to Portugal, and we've
Mm,
done a lot of off-roading separately in, let's say, the Far East. And
mm,
one of the things which I noticed there was a lot of the villages were on the brink of complete desertion because the younger
mm,
generations had moved to the west of the country. Is there
yeah.
something similar like that in Wales as well, where you find that maybe there are settlements which were previously villages which are now deserted, or where you've come across villages where, yeah, they're not so popular and so well populated purely because the younger generations are not interested in the original lifestyle of the area?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and yes, definitely there is an element of that in Wales. I don't think it's as pronounced as I found it to be in Portugal. You know, in Portugal, as you just touched on, there are whole towns where the younger generation has moved away to find work and, you know, a better life in economic terms. And in Wales, it's definitely more isolated, and probably the movement happened longer ago. So what I did come across along the trail were like abandoned mining villages and abandoned farming villages in like the middle of nowhere, you know, but they'd been abandoned long ago. So it's honestly, it's an incredible thing to come across a village of like old slate houses, because slate is ubiquitous
Yeah.
throughout the area. They use it to build
Hmm.
everything, and it's almost like a skeletal thing, you know, these towns. But the roofs have all collapsed long since, and so it's just the walls standing, and you see these kind of glowering grey faces of these old like terraced houses, and houses are just standing on their own, which are really incredible to explore. And you kind of think, wow, I guess these have been villages that had supported a mine for mine workers, or supported land that had been fertile at one point and then wasn't for whatever reason, and so the farmer had moved elsewhere. And so you definitely see a lot of that, a lot of abandoned buildings to explore, which I always love to do, you
Yeah.
know.
Is that sort of the sort of place where you would stop for the night, or were you trying to again remain as remote as possible?
Well, yeah. So I'm trying to think. There was an occasion where I stopped next to an ancient building of some kind. Like there was like the buttress of one side of it,
Hmm.
and one wall standing. And this thing was like, I think it must have been over 1,000 years old. It was a really ancient building. Um, and I camped in the shadow of that. There was like a river that was running through a vale, and it had actually, I guess, rerouted over the years. And so this river kind of circumvented this building, and I parked on one side of the river, and this thing is there, you know. And so you have your campfire and that, and it's illuminating this ancient wall, and you know, you can get pretty dreamy after a few beers, like
Spooky.
contemplating those. Yeah, yeah, exactly. If you let yourself go down that route, definitely. I tend to find the beer fortifies you against the ghosts a little bit,
Well,
you
that's the
know.
right way. All right, now you're on food and drink. So you are
Hmm.
self-sufficient. You've got what? You've got your own cooking facility in the back of the Land Cruiser. How long could you do at a stretch before having to go and replenish your stocks?
Yeah, so I have a fridge. It's an ARB. I think it's a 50-liter
Hmm.
fridge. So that helps. You know, it keeps things pretty cold. And that obviously runs as long as my power system's up and running. But with meat and such like, there is an element of needing to buy that fresh, you know. So I'd say I could go a week more or
Hmm.
less without visiting a supermarket or a shop or whatever you could find where you could buy fresh protein.
Yeah.
Um, Towards the end of that, you're kind of making some tin can meals, you know, that aren't particularly as good as the fresh meals that you could make at the start, you know, after a full resupply. If I wanted to, I could get on further, you know, if I knew that I was going to go into the bush for a long
Mm.
time, you know, you can do things like buy canned meat,
Yeah.
spam or whatever, and go real World War II on it, you know. But like, I prefer not to if I can. And in Wales, as you say, like society, civilization isn't just there, so it's possible to kind of divert off the trail if you need to. And oftentimes, I would kind of go to a petrol station. I need to fill up on fuel. I'll
Hmm.
buy, you know, box of chicken or whatever
Bits and
there, and
pieces.
go back out. Exactly. Yeah.
All right. So you could basically plan 5 to 7 days of being away on your own. So how were
Hmm.
the daily stages? What sort of distances were you covering? Because that'll give certainly me and also the people listening an idea of the terrain you were up against.
Yeah, good question. So it was hugely varied, honestly. Sometimes I would be covering kind of a very short stretch if the terrain was particularly brutal on that given day. I think the lower record was 20 miles in
Wow.
one day. Yeah, I remember thinking there was a point at which I'd been off roading for an entire day, 8 hours, and I'd managed to travel 2 miles. And that was because I got stuck and had to reroute and then took another route, you know, and it was just brutal terrain. And I was thinking, God, this is going to be a long day of trying to get anywhere. But then conversely, there were some days where if the trails were a lot easier, like forestry trails or farm tracks and all that kind of thing, and you get a good run at them, where I could kind of do 150 miles a
Hmm.
day. That was the top end, absolute top end. So I guess you'd average maybe 60, 70 miles a day, somewhere along those
Okay.
lines. Perhaps a little less, actually, thinking about it, doing the maths.
Well, based on that, you've probably had an opportunity to maybe revise your equipment which you take with you. Let's not talk about winches because we've done that bit already. But are there other
Mm.
bits and pieces or tools or whatever which you found they would have been good to have?
Definitely, yeah, absolutely. And like we touched on earlier, I packed for a trip in
Hmm.
Portugal, like, you know, dry, reasonable weather, and so I was unprepared for the constant wet and damp and all that kind of thing. And so I would revise my wardrobe and how much, you know, clothing that I would need to take in that regard. As regards equipment, um, again, weather related, I currently am running in terms of my 12 volt auxiliary battery system, solar only rather than being connected to the vehicle.
Hmm.
So my Land Cruiser is early 90s Euro spec, which makes it a 24-volt system for the main car. And so it is quite difficult to run a split charge system from a 24-volt system. There are ways that you can do it, and I have tried in the past without using specialist equipment, and they've always ended in me blowing up things or fried phone batteries. You know, it's always been a disaster. And so at the last on the last trip, I thought I'm just going to keep this simple and keep the two systems completely separate, and that was fine in Portugal, where there's perfect sun every day and the batteries are getting charged up. When you've got a period of 5 days without seeing the sun, literally with the cloud on top of your head, you know, and sometimes in thick fog, those batteries don't charge at all, you know. And so that became a real problem. Power, it was a constant battle, you know, to charge everything that I needed to charge. including like the camera
Hmm.
equipment and all that I needed to use. Keep warm at night, because in the torrential rain, there's no campfires. You want to run a night heater really in the cabin at night, so on the cold nights. And so yeah, power was just a constant battle, and so that's something that will definitely change going forward. I now very much see the value in having an integrated system.
Yeah, relying on solar in a place where you're literally sitting in the clouds is going to be futile.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, it's something that I would not like to repeat again. I found myself on occasion having to try and find like campsites, like paid
yeah.
campsites, so that I could plug in. I did that a couple of times because I kind of thought, wow, my batteries are so um, discharged right now. If I do another night, I'm going to kill them, and then I'm going to be in real
Mm.
trouble. And so I did that, and that kind of took away from it. And you have to then peel off the trail, go find a campsite, plug in, do it, and then go back to the trail the next morning. So yeah,
All right.
for sure, next time I'll do that.
So I know you hit. Well, no, you didn't hit. You started off with rain, rain, rain. Did it actually get better as it went further into the journey? Because, as you said earlier on, it was a case of all your clothes were wet, inside the vehicle was wet because you're getting in and out all the time.
Mm.
How long were you sort of in a moist environment?
Good question. I'd say, I mean, it never really dried out fully, like it's I think there were the 5 days at the start, which were just, I had to accept I was going to be constantly soaking. It did fare up a little bit in as the trip went on, but with it being Wales, and there's just an element of moisture in the air that means that nothing ever really dries
Mm.
out. You have to apply heat to stuff to have it dry out. And so, you're constantly a little bit uncomfortable in terms of dampness. Even when the sun's out, everything's still a bit wet. And so yeah, running the night heater inside helped a bit, and I would try and dry my boots out every day on the night heater. That would be one thing that I would try, because I hate getting up in the morning and you put your boots on and they're still wet. Oh God, right, okay, this is how it started out.
I feel for you
And
there.
so I try my best. Yeah, yeah, it was gross, and so that's something that I would take as well. An extra pair of boots. I only took the one, and a pair of trainers, and obviously the trainers were just useless. The train that you're going through. And so yeah, if I was doing that again, I'd take a second pair of footwear in that regard.
So, how did your cabin then stand up to the rigors of travel? I mean, let's forget the rain at the moment because the water was everywhere anyway. But
Mm,
I mean, you built your cabin yourself. Um,
yeah.
I don't think it's been through quite a rough ordeal as it has in Wales. So
Mm.
how are you happy with what you've done, or are you going to start reconfiguring that as well?
So I'm broadly happy with how it performed. There are some things that I will change, and I kind of think Wales was just about as extreme as it will get weather-wise in terms of water ingress and all that kind
Mm.
of thing. And so there's nothing I can really do about that. There were some nights where the water came through the canvas, and it's like, well, that's just the way that where it's gonna be. um, and yeah, as regards the terrain and the trail, it's definitely hard on the inside of the camper cabin, with all the twisting and turning. The the furniture that I built, because I built everything inside myself, it does start to come apart at the seams for sure. Screws get fatigued and the heads break off, or they work their way out. And so towards the end of the trip, I had like the thing just trying to destroy itself every day, and I'd be like, oh, Jesus, put a few more screws in here, tighten them there, and try and get to the end. So I'll definitely be bracing things inside a little bit more. The outside of the vehicle took a beating, on some of the tracks. As I mentioned, I had it on its side a fair few times. As a consequence of, again, the weather. It always comes back to the weather in Wales. You get washouts on the tracks that I don't think you get anywhere else. Well, obviously you do, but it's the washouts in Wales are extreme and constant. One side of the track gets water damaged, if you like, and becomes the water runoff. And obviously there's just so much rain that the tracks become so uneven that on one side you get like regular 30 plus angles, 30 degree plus angles, that is. And so the vehicle is like on its side, and with it being a bit of a wider vehicle anyway, with it having the cabin on, there were a fair few times where there was contact with that opposite bank. And one particular track really got me because there was a load of bracken. Spring bracken hides a lot of things because it comes right out.
Very dense as
And
well.
on this, very, very dense, and you can't see through them with the fog and weather and all that kind of thing. You're like, oh well, no idea what's in there. And I think there was a dry stone wall in there, and I came to the end of the track. I was like, oh god, I've wrecked it. And so yeah, it's got a real bad scrape on one side, or multiple scrapes. So I'll have to attend to that. But
I like listening to all this because, going back to the beginning, Wales isn't very big, and
exactly.
you've still managed to do an awful lot of miles off road. But if we look at what you've done in the past, you've done Portugal, but you've done the Americas. You've seen some amazing stuff in South America, some very challenging situations. I just look at this and, listening to you, Wales is, I wouldn't say it's unique, but it's pretty powerful in the way it's attacking you on a day-to-day basis, isn't it?
It is.
Well, nature is
remarkable. Nature is, yeah. This is part of it surprised me so much just how brutal it was, day in, day out. Just the relentlessness of the terrain and the weather. Everything combines to just. It was the most consistently brutal trip that I've done, and like you said, I've done the Pan-American Highway. It's like 50,000 miles of pretty intense terrain all the way through the Andes. You go through deserts, jungles, everything you can imagine, and big stretches off road as well. And yet nothing was a patch on Wales as regards the sustained brutality of the off-road terrain. It was just like constant, absolutely constant. And that to me was like, wow. I was consistently, I couldn't believe I was saying it, considering everything that we just said. But yeah, it was the most challenging four-wheel drive trip I've ever done.
That's quite an eye-opener, really, isn't it?
It is.
Is it something you'll do again in Wales, or have you said, right, I've seen all of Wales, I've seen a lot of Wales, and experienced a lot? Would you go back and do something similar again?
I would, not in a hurry. I've had enough of the self-flagellation of the Welsh flavour, put it that way. But I definitely would, and I would go back to specific tracks in Wales. But aside from the punishment that it metes out on a daily basis, it sounds almost ridiculous to say, but one of the things that made the trip take so long in Wales, with it being an intense region of farming, were the gates. Without traveling solo, you have to get out and open every gate that you come across and close that gate as well. And in Wales, sometimes they're spaced at kind of 10-meter intervals, and there's just one after the other, after the other, after the other. And so it gets to the point where you're like, oh my god, like, how am I ever going to get anywhere? Because I'm just doing gates literally every minute. And so that, honestly, it gets old really quickly. And it's not all of Wales, but it's a fair chunk of Wales. I would say that I must have opened and closed 100 plus gates every single day on my own.
Oh, that really is
Um,
a lot.
and so it's insane. It's incredible amount of getting out, and that knackers you really
Mm.
quickly because you have to turn the car off because I like to leave it in gear. I don't trust Land Cruiser handbrakes. So, so you're turning the Land Cruiser off every time, get it out, going and opening it, and oftentimes it's mud, up to your knees, and so you have to go out, do the gate, get back in the car, drive through, turn the car off again, wade through the mud, shut the frigging gate, and then do it again a minute later. You're like, oh my god. So for that reason alone, I would steer clear of Wales in the immediate future. I think I'd rather some clearer trails. You know what I mean?
I mean, all these fences and gates are normally there to sort of keep livestock in place. Did you come
Yeah,
across a lot
correct.
of livestock?
Tons and tons of
Oh,
sheep. Yeah,
that's famous.
yeah. Thousands of sheep, yeah, like every day. I think it's a truth that the sheep population is larger than the human population in Wales, and
Mm.
yeah, I can attest for that. And some cattle as well, but it's mainly the sheep. So yeah.
What about wild animals? Anything exciting out there?
Anything exciting in Wales? Not that I came across. You come across the usual rabbits and hares and the odd fox
Hmm.
as well, and birds of prey. You see a lot of birds of prey out there, but yeah, I didn't come across anything wild or exciting.
All right. Um, Again, sort of just reflecting on myself a little bit here. When we're traveling,
Mm,
as I say, we like to look for the historical sites, etc., but also the interaction with some of the older villages. Were you
mm.
able to, I don't know, taste the local beers and eat the local fare?
On a couple of occasions, yeah, with me plotting a course through deliberately the most remote parts of Wales that I could
Mhm.
find, I often found myself outside of villages and towns and such like. I'd pass through them infrequently, and so Wales, particularly for me, was not a very cultural trip aside from the historical, abandoned stuff that you find along the trail. There were a couple of occasions where I passed through, backwater villages, and I would see a pub and think I'm gonna go and treat myself to a pub lunch or whatever, and so I would do that and have a nice, like, I would go for like a steak pie or lamb something, obviously with all all the sheep, and have a bit of the local beer, obviously.
Got to enjoy sometime, didn't you?
So yeah,
Yes.
you got it. One of it sounds funny, but one of the meals I remember the most, I think, was probably on the fourth day of my trip, and I'd been fighting the weather for 4 days, just tipping it down, torrential rain, and I passed through this village, and it had a kebab shop, and I thought, oh man, I'm getting myself a kebab, and I went in there and got this gigantic, what was it, like a shish kebab, huge thing. Went and ate it in the car in the tipping rain, and I've never tasted food that tasted that good before. Like, oh, this is amazing. I hadn't eaten anything all day. So not typical Welsh cuisine by any means, but it was certainly memorable.
I've got to come back to one point. You were saying that you were planning your routes as far away from, or let's say as remotely as possible. You didn't want to go through
Mm,
the villages, etc.
yeah.
What maps do you use to search for your trails? Because they've got to be very, very detailed, especially if they're that remote, surely.
Yes, they do. So you can get GPX tracks from a variety of different places. I use Wikiloc
Hmm.
a lot, amongst some others, and then I use a couple of different apps to plot the route. I use OSM and Maps.
Hmm.
It's quite a good one for trail mapping, and I use Outdoor Active for the satellite because they have very good satellite maps. You can tell, what kind of terrain you're going to be going through, and so yeah, I use those two, and then Wikiloc as well for the actual
Yeah.
trail plotting. And yeah, you can map them out pretty well. The other one for trails in the UK is a paid one, and it is Glass Green Lane Association. I can't remember the full name, but it's like the official green laners
Right.
inside the UK. And they're very good for trail availability and update, and they kind of position themselves as stewards of the trails and green laning as well. So it's kind of a good thing in that regard as
All
well.
right. And once you've got your sort of GPX file sorted, what are you using to navigate with? Are you using a phone or a Garmin?
I use a phone at present, and that's not without its problems because you try to do everything on the phone, and um, sometimes just keeping power in the phone was difficult because again, back to the weather, the water was coming in literally every seam of the vehicle. Like it was coming in at one point through my windscreen seal, like pretty, torrentially through the windscreen seal and through the doors. And so everything in the cabin is wet, or the cab, I should say. And so water got into my charging port of the phone, and iPhones, they don't like that at
No.
all. And so I was down to like 4% battery. Like, Jesus, this is actually, of all the things, going to be the thing that actually stalls me in the trail. Like the fact that I can't charge my phone, and I ended up diverting to that kebab shop and trying to warm it up enough to carry it on, which I did. But yeah, just the phone for
I
navigating.
think it's fair to say when it comes to water ingress, my trusty Land Rover is very efficient at the same. It comes through the windscreen, it comes through the doors.
You know the pain then.
Oh, God. I mean, we drove down to Spain last year and we, cut across the Pyrenees and we hit a
Yeah.
weather front like you would not believe. And I genuinely thought up until that point that my roof at least was always watertight. But it came
Mm.
in a sheet of water through the roof. The only real benefit is
Incredible.
I've got holes in the floor as well. So it didn't collect, and they're not rust holes; they are deliberate holes. But yeah, I know
That's
that.
forward
I know
planning.
that
I have
problem.
rust holes.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're yeah, well versed in that particular challenge of old vehicle
Oh,
ownership then,
definitely.
just like I am.
But then on
Yeah.
the other
It's
hand,
amazing, isn't it?
I think it's the simplicity of these old vehicles which then really show their merit because there's not a
Yeah.
lot of electronics to go wrong, really.
And that's it. That's it. Yeah. That's the plus side. With my Land Cruiser is the 1HZ engine, and there are, well, basically one cable to the fuel stop solenoid to start the thing and run it, and that's the only electronic part. Obviously, the alternator is a key component as well, and that gave me a little bit of jip as well as the only other electronic component. Oh, and the starter motor, and they all didn't like what I put it through, but they came through, But with a more modern vehicle, I don't know, like whether it would be able to withstand that level of constant moisture. It's a good question.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are lots of modern vehicles around that are built for this sort of trip, but I suppose the other aspect is that I'd be a bit reluctant to put a brand new polished vehicle on its side on a regular basis.
Yeah,
I think we're better
definitely.
off with our old ones.
I think so. Yeah.
So, okay, you entered Wales through Caerphilly. You've
Mm.
saw a total of 1,000 miles. You've had lots of, let's say, rough experiences, tough and challenging experiences. But what about the other side of it? I mean, you must have had some real sort of wow moments as well.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, aside from being incredibly challenging, which it was, it really opened my eyes to firstly the beauty and ruggedness of parts of the UK that are available for you to
Hmm.
go and see and pass through. Like some of those landscapes were just incredible. Um, and were like reminiscent to me of like really remote parts of Canada and places that you don't expect to see in the UK. And I guess the whole impetus behind this trip for me was to see whether I could have this kind of adventure so close at home. I'm from the
Hmm.
UK. I've spent most of my life trying to have experiences outside of the UK. Um, and so I have a very kind of love-hate relationship with Britain as a place. I find it the weather, the climate grim. I find it predictable, and so I that's driven me to do probably most of what I've done. In terms of overlanding and exploring and traveling and all that kind of thing, because I don't really like the UK, and to how shall I put this? To go and be able to have these experiences. Like I didn't honestly, when I started out on that expedition, I didn't really think I was going to be able to do it. I thought there was going to be something, whether it be rules or blockages on the trail, or whether I'd get there and it would just be actually really tame and or paved or whatever. I kind of thought, probably this is going to be something that ends in failure. And for me to have done that and been able to do it and to go through rural and remote and strikingly beautiful scenery the way that I did was kind of like it forced me to confront some really old biases I think that I had against England and what is possible to do inside not England the UK Wales. I'll get shot for that. uh, to be able to do inside the UK. It was a real kind of it forced me to confront some things inside myself. Like, wow, this is really possible, and it is possible to have wild adventure still inside of the
Mm.
UK, which was a surprise to me.
I think that's such an important point because it always not, and that's probably incorrect. You shouldn't say always, but many, many times people express themselves by saying, I'm going on an adventure and I'm going to, I don't know, Turkey, Romania, Morocco, wherever.
Hmm.
Yet you've just proven that adventure is literally around the corner if you look for it. And you don't have to go
Yeah.
on a 1,000 mile tour. You can do a
Hmm.
day or 2 days being right out in the wild, cut off from everything, having a totally challenging experience. And
Hmm.
as you say, it's in the UK in your case. Um,
Yeah.
and I think that's
Absolutely.
something which a lot of people tend to ignore. They always think, it's like the grass is greener on the other side of the fence, that you have to go away for
Hmm.
that adventure. Looking at the other way round, lots of people come from abroad to the UK for an adventure. So it's a
Yeah.
case of picking up on some of that, I think, as well.
It is. It's an interesting thing, and that's what I found in myself. I was daily kind of thinking about this because you're forced to. Um, Previously, I would have said, "There's nothing to be done here. This tiny little overpopulated island where the rules are, just far too strict, and all these things that were in my head previously." And there I was, in remote, wild, intense terrain, having these adventures. And it's an interesting thing to have to confront that in a really good way, and I think that how shall I put this? It's shown me certainly that you don't have to go to the Far East or down into Africa or any one of these wild destinations that I do still want to go to or that I have been to have real true adventure. It's right. in your backyard,
Yeah.
if you go and look for it. It's just a case of going and looking for it. That's all it is.
Yeah. Again, this is something which I think, again, is also very important because ever since COVID, we've seen a lot more people who are out there with their rooftop tents on fairly tame vehicles. I mean, nothing like your Land Cruiser, but they're still out looking for adventure. And
Mm.
what you've also done with this particular trip is to show that because it's so close to home, you haven't got to face all the problems with going abroad, with visas. What happens if I'm a long way away from home? How do I get back again? But you can still have this adventure. And for people who are just thinking about starting with overlanding and remote vehicle supported travel,
Mm.
I just love this evidence that it really is in your backyard. And you can't find
Absolutely.
a better place to learn about the rigors and the trials of overlanding um,
Mm.
without a huge expense and without unnecessary complication.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's a very interesting point, and I get a lot of people message me. How can I do what you've done? How can I start overlanding? What do I need to do? And I think overlanding as a pursuit, if you like, I think has really gained traction and taken off, especially in the US over the last kind of few
Mm.
years, and it's exploded in that regard. And so too have brands selling gear to these people who want to go out there and do this stuff. And for sure, there's a place for all that. But I think a lot of people think, oh, I need this ridiculous monster truck to go and do it. I need to have the rooftop tent. I need to have all this gear that's going to cost me 25 grand or
Mm.
whatever. And I don't think that you do. Like, I think that since the adventure's so close to home, you could go with a fairly stock 4x4 and have a load of adventures with like a camp stove in the back. And, I think it's easier than a lot of people think to get started.
I couldn't agree more. I always like to I love history. So I like looking
Mm,
back at the pioneers and some of the explorers who, I mean, people who went on camels, for goodness sakes. But even
mm,
in the 50s, um, probably one of the most recognized and famous journeys is First Overland, which was basically from London to Singapore. And if you look at
mm,
the vehicles they used, um, they don't have all the bells and whistles which you get out of your local dealerships these days. And
yeah.
I think they had winches, shovels, ropes,
Mm,
pickaxes, and six young people looking for an adventure. So
yeah. It's
yeah,
fantastic.
and turn that standard of equipment, and you have to consider they were driving through jungle, they were taking routes which didn't exist. Um, they
Yeah.
were having a proper adventure, a real adventure, and
Mm,
they don't need ABS and electronics, etc. And I don't think anybody really has to have that today to take themselves on a
yeah.
fantastic adventure. So, again,
Absolutely.
the simplicity of having an adventure on your doorstep, not having to invest in what a lot of people would like to believe you need, but just
Mm.
getting off the sofa and getting out and doing it. That's it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's it. Yeah, it's just having that impetus to start and to do something and build it up from that. You could go away with a real basic kit, like you just said, basic tools, basic living uh, equipment, like a stove and such like, and you could go have that adventure and dip your feet into the water that way. And often I think my build has evolved a lot from the initial iteration of when I did the Pan American Highway. I had an incredibly basic setup, really. I had like a Coleman stove, which is like the prime petrol stove, pump to prime thing. Um, what else did I have? Like a very basic toolkit, like I had like an old socket set with a few of the sockets missing and that kind of thing, a hammer, an axe, and a roof tent. I did have a roof tent, and that was it. Like I had no real fancy recovery equipment. Oh, at the time I had the winch, which we blew up, but like it was bare bones stock. And obviously it's evolved so much since then, and I'm carrying all this kind of more fancy equipment. But sometimes I look back at that old setup and I think, Jesus, that was so
Mm.
simple and so pure. There is a part of me that misses that, which I never thought that I would say with all my creature comforts in my cabin right now. Like, I thought that I would be basking in it, but it's like, God, there was a beautiful simplicity to it all,
Yeah, yeah. I think, summarizing, what we've talked about today, I just like the fact that you've put out there 100 reels, and just for those people who don't know where to look up Travel Beasts on Instagram and you'll find all the reels. But you're an experienced overlander. You know how to look after your vehicle. You've built that vehicle yourself to your own specification. But at the same time, and I know I'm repeating myself here, it's so important that you've just proved to people it's easy to get out and have the adventure of your lifetime without a huge expense, without traveling
Mm,
overseas. And it doesn't matter which country you're in, that adventure is still available
mm,
to you. And I
absolutely.
think that's probably the biggest takeaway of today's talk. But you've had a huge amount of takeaways from your travel as well. And I suppose my
Yeah.
next question should be, what's next, Reece?
The $1 million question. Well, I'm still kind of in the planning phases of the next one. Without giving too much away, it's likely to include a good portion of Southern Europe and Northern Africa.
Mm.
I've been collecting tracks and maps and such like to put a huge route together, and the next one is it's going to cover a lot more in terms of miles or kilometers, whatever you want to work in. um, but yeah, it's going to be an international trip, which is going to go through several different countries, and it will be primarily off-road and yeah, an extended trip.
Well, I'll tell you what, let's draw today to a close. And let's, without putting a firm date on it, I think there's two topics which I'd really, really like to go through with you in maybe two other podcasts. One is how you're planning for your next trip, what you've taken away from Portugal, from Wales, and how you're going to integrate what you've learned there in your next event.
Mm,
And let's also talk about your vehicle. You've had it a long
absolutely.
time. I know some of the surprises, let's put it that way, you had when you first purchased it. I know which journeys you've
Yeah.
taken it on. And therefore, I think it would be interesting to discuss, what you've done with the vehicle since you've had it and brought it up to today's standard. I mean, you've made some heavy
Mm.
conversions to it. So, Reece, without drawing this out and without giving too much away, let's set up a few new dates off air, and
Absolutely.
let's start a small series of talks.
Let's do it, Mike. I'd love that. Yeah, it's been a pleasure to talk to you today. It's been a great conversation, and I look forward to appearing again and hashing out some more interesting stuff.
Brilliant. Well, Reece, thanks a lot for your time and for your insights. Thanks for tuning in to the At Overland Europe podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and download our app for more adventures and exclusive content. Remember, you can find our guest social media and websites linked in the description below. Until next time, safe travels.